is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?
No known traffic.
Seems to be a large aircraft.
On the evening of the 21st of October 1978, a young Australian pilot, Frederick Valentich, disappeared while on a training flight in a Cessna 182L over the Bass Strait off the coast of Melbourne, Australia. In the moments before he lost contact with Melbourne Air Traffic Control, an increasingly panicked Valentich reported that he was being buzzed by strange lights and a strange craft, which he described as, quote, not an aircraft. Shortly after also reporting that his plane was experiencing mechanical difficulty, communication was abruptly lost and he was never heard from again. The story caused a sensation and led many to claim that he had been abducted or taken down by aliens. So what really happened that mysterious night? The 20-year-old Valentich took off for King Island, part of the Australian state of Tasmania. His motivation for the flight was unclear. He had told two different stories, that he was going to pick up friends, and that he was going to pick up crayfish, both of which were untrue. At 7:06 p.m, he contacted Melbourne to inform them that he was being followed by an aircraft at 4,500 feet, only to be told that there was no known traffic there. Valentich then reported that an unknown craft, illuminated by 4 bright landing lights, had passed 1,000 feet above him at high speed. The craft then approached him from the east and began orbiting above him. He further reported that the object had a shiny metal surface with a green light. It was at this point that he also informed ATC that he was having engine problems. His controller then heard what were described as, quote, metallic scraping sounds, and contact was lost. An air and sea search commenced involving vessels in the area, an Air Force Lockheed, and 8 civilian aircraft, but no trace of Valentich was ever found. The Australian Department of Transport investigated the incident, failing to determine a cause. They did conclude that it was likely fatal to Valentich. 5 years after the disappearance, an engine flap was found washed ashore on Flinders Island. The part was from a Cessna 182, and its part number was within a range that could have come from Valentich's aircraft. The UFO dimension to the mystery gave it worldwide publicity, prompting a number of fascinating theories. What was the evidence for an alien encounter or abduction? Proponents of that theory point to multiple reports from local people of an erratically moving green light in the sky that evening, which tallies with what Valentich described to air traffic controllers. However, reports of these sightings largely appeared after the incident, inviting skepticism. An amateur photographer out taking pictures that day near Cape Otway Lighthouse, Roy Manifold, captured an unidentified object in one of his pictures. Ground Saucer Watch, an Arizona-based group of ufologists, concluded that it showed a flying object. Others were not so sure, pointing to the possibility of dust or an insect on or near the camera lens. Examination of the photo has proved inconclusive either way. There are credible theories which point to a more human tragedy. Valentich's piloting career had been a checkered one. Though he had 150 hours of flight time and held a Class 4 instrumentation rating, allowing him to fly at night, he had failed a number of commercial pilot exams and had been involved in flying incidents. Warned for entering restricted airspace in Sydney, Valentich was, at the time, being investigated for deliberately flying into clouds, with prosecution being considered. This gave rise to the theory that he had become disorientated that night and was flying upside down. The eerie lights that he had seen would have been the lights of his own aircraft, reflected by the water below. In this scenario, however, the Cessna's gravity-operated fuel system would have cut out in very short order. A 2013 examination of the incident by retired U.S. Air Force pilot James McGaha and author Joe Nickell proposed that Valentich was deceived by the illusion of a tilted horizon, one of the many mind tricks that can happen in aviation. Attempting to compensate unnecessarily, the plane would have entered a spiral dive, giving the pilot a further illusion that he was being orbited by lights. What he would have been seeing were either planets or stars in the night sky, or lights of civilization on nearby islands. This spiral would also explain the rough engine noises just before contact was lost. Yet more theories posit that Valentich staged his own disappearance by reporting a flight plan to King Island, then going on somewhere else. It has been revealed that the aircraft was not plotted on radar, and police investigators received word that an unscheduled landing of a light aircraft in a different area had taken place around the time of his disappearance. But why would the young pilot want to disappear? Would the threat of prosecution for a flying offence be enough to prompt such drastic action? And why hasn't he reappeared or been unmasked, given the huge publicity surrounding the case and the passage of time? This led others to conclude that Valentich had committed suicide and gone out in a blaze of glory with the sensational claim that he was being stalked by an alien craft. Relatives and friends insisted that he was not a likely candidate for suicide, although this is a common refrain in cases of people taking their own lives. Valentich's father did also confirm that his son believed completely in UFOs and had been worried about being attacked by one whilst in flight. In the end, this tragic loss of a young life is likely a case of a fatal pilot error. But the chilling possibility, no matter how small, that Frederick Valentich, alone over the ocean in a small plane, was abducted by aliens, has kept this fascinating mystery alive. One can only hope, for his sake, that it was pilot error, and not a far more frightening alternative. In the autumn of 1989, thousands of everyday residents of Belgium began seeing strange craft in the night sky. Such was the consistency and regularity of UFO reports that the authorities took them seriously, culminating in a July 1991 press conference at which senior members of the Belgian military provided footage showing a jet fighter interception of one of the strange craft that had appeared on radar. So what was really going on in the skies over Belgium? The mystery began on the 29th of November 1989, near Eupen, a small town close to the German border. Two gendarmes on patrol in a police car, Heinrich Nickel and Hubert von Montigny, saw a strange light illuminating a field. Pulling over to investigate, they saw a huge triangular craft with powerful lights hovering above ground. Unsure as to what was going on, they called the sighting in to dispatcher Albert Kreutz to see if he was aware of any military maneuvers in the area. The craft moved away towards Eupen, and the gendarmes followed in their car. Kreutz, who had been skeptical of the initial reports, suddenly began seeing strange lights in his office at the gendarme station, which he described as, quote, something like a laser beam. The craft circled over Eupen, then headed away again toward a forest, followed by the gendarmes. Kreutz had by now contacted local airports, who reported back that there was no unusual activity. Meanwhile, Nickel and von Montigny, who had been observing the craft near the forest, suddenly spotted another unexplained craft, rising into the sky near them. The second craft then departed at speed. Moments later, Kreutz saw something similar outside his window, which hovered for a short time, then took off. Later in the evening, 2 other gendarmes sighted a UFO in a village 8 miles to the north of Eupen. They described a similar experience and a similar object. The next day, 11 other gendarmes and dozens of private citizens made near identical reports. The story was picked up by the media, and UFO mania spread across Belgium. Reports of sightings and experiences flooded in from across the country. After a hiatus of a few months, the next wave of UFO incidents began in March 1990. After a sighting near Brussels was confirmed at a NATO radar station as a UFO, 2 F-16s from the Belgian Air Force scrambled and were able to lock onto the object, only for it to disappear at great speed. The height of the second wave of new sightings came in April 1990, when a photograph emerged that purported to show one of the presumed alien craft. Then, as now, the Belgian UFO wave divided opinion into skeptics and believers. So what is more likely to be true? Was Belgium really the subject of large-scale UFO incursions? The first fact to consider was that the incidents only occurred in Belgium. Eupen, for example, was not only near the German border, but also frontiers with the Netherlands and Luxembourg. Yet few, if any, sightings were reported elsewhere. In the pre-internet world, sudden fads and crazes took much longer to spread, and sometimes they never spread at all. The fact that the UFO wave was contained almost totally within Belgium gives credence to those who claim that the whole episode was localized mass hysteria. It is believed that the other gendarmes in Eupen either had access to the radio system on which the original sighting call was made, or heard about the experience that night. Members of the public came forward in the immediate aftermath of the incident becoming known. A common refrain of the believers is that the stories of those who had claimed sightings are highly consistent, and this alone is evidence that they are real. That could be true, but it is just as likely that consistency of experience is evidence of mass delusion. People can be unconsciously influenced by what they read in the media or hear from friends. The resulting stories tend to echo this. Tied to the mass delusion theory is the fact that many man-made objects can appear unusual at night, in fleeting glances or from far distance. And the atmosphere in Belgium in 1991 had become highly suggestible. People were looking for strange things at night. Once media interest in the subject waned, so too did the sightings. The pilots who pursued the object seen on radar never actually made eye contact with it. The Belgian Air Force, while concluding that the object was unexplained and potentially a UFO, could also not definitively say that it wasn't interference or a false reading, known in radar terminology as brag scattering. Finally, the famous photo turned out to be a fake. In 2011, a man named Patrick Marichal invited Belgian reporters to his home to show them what he and some friends had done to achieve the prank. Taking a sheet of styrofoam, they cut it into a triangle, painted it black, embedded a flashlight in each corner, then hung it from a string. Marichal provided a series of photos of their early efforts that preceded the final shot. In all likelihood, the Belgian UFO wave was a case of genuine mistaken identity, which quickly accelerated into mass hysteria and delusion. But while what followed the original sighting was highly questionable, there is just a chance that what happened in Eupen on the 29th of November 1989 was real. Bob Lazar stunned the world in the late 1980s with claims that he had worked on alien spacecraft in the US military's legendary top-secret facility, Area 51. Whilst logic tells us that his tales are preposterous, just enough fragments of evidence have kept his story alive for over 30 years. In a May 1989 interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas TV station KLAS, under the pseudonym Dennis and with his face hidden, Lazar detailed his work at S4, a secret facility he claimed exists near the Nellis Air Force Base installation known as Area 51. According to Lazar, aircraft hangars built into the side of mountains housed alien craft that had been captured or crashed. His work involved reverse engineering these ships to gain scientific knowledge of how they operated. Giving a second interview that November, unmasked and as himself, he said he worked for the US Navy via defense contractor EG&G. The company immediately said that they had no record of him working for them. Lazar went on to describe the propulsion systems of the alleged alien craft. He said they used antimatter, fueled by the chemical element with atomic number 115. This element had not been named at the time of Lazar's interview, but was later synthesized in 2003 and named moscovium. The resulting energy, according to Lazar, would propel the craft through a gravity distortion field. He additionally claimed to have read documents proving that Earth had been visited for 10,000 years by aliens from the star system Zeta Reticuli. However, no planets have yet been found in that system. A further claim that he had seen an alien specimen in a lab was withdrawn in later years. Lazar's assertion that he had a master's degree in physics from MIT and in electronic technology from Caltech were both disputed by the universities, as was his claim to have worked at Area 51. His credibility seemed to be non-existent. Then, just as his story looked to be falling apart, one other discredited claim, that he had worked as a physicist at Los Alamos, suddenly reignited interest. There's lots more to come in this video, but please consider liking, subscribing to the channel, and sharing. And please consider supporting my work with a PayPal donation. The link is in the description. Thank you. KLAS TV found the name Lazar Robert in a 1982 Los Alamos National Laboratory phone directory, but the laboratory repeatedly denied having any records on him. All of a sudden, Lazar's claim that he had been scrubbed from official records for speaking out sounded a little more plausible. If he could establish an attempt to discredit him, the obvious question would be, what did he know that the US military and government went to such lengths to cover up? Continuing interest in Lazar revealed more about the man himself. In 1990, he pleaded guilty to pandering after being arrested during an investigation into a prostitution ring. In addition to 150 hours community service, he was ordered to undergo psychotherapy. In 2006, a company he operates, United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies, which sells a variety of materials and chemicals, was charged with violating the Federal Hazardous Substances Act for shipping restricted chemicals across state lines. A guilty plea resulted in a $7,500 fine. In 2017, Lazar's workplace was raided by the FBI and local police, which Lazar theorizes was to recover element 115, a substance that he says he took from a government lab. records obtained through a Freedom of Information request, show the raid was part of a murder investigation. The enduring story of Bob Lazar seems to have three possibilities: that he is being truthful, that he is being untruthful, or that the US military tacitly support his and other claims, as UFO stories help them obscure what really goes on at top-secret facilities. Lazar still has supporters, and his claims find a fair hearing on platforms such as the Joe Rogan podcast. He admits he has no evidence. The likelihood is that his claims are fabricated, but the passage of time may have made that irrelevant. In the same way that new generations are no longer interested in the Kennedy assassination, they are also increasingly disinterested in UFOs. As society becomes more self-obsessed by the day, many are uninterested in other humans, let alone extraterrestrials. But Bob Lazar provided us with a tantalizing story that was of its time. In the lead up to the millennium, with all its prophecies of doom or fulfillment, he captured the imagination with a tale of visiting aliens and their amazing technology. And if, for a moment, he made people think outside of their narrow box, then it hardly even matters if it was true.